Brett, it's great to have you back. We are here to do a recap of UTMB, maybe slightly, somewhat dipping into CCC and OCC discussion at certain points. First thing I got to say, I got to cop to I got a notification yesterday telling me my phone app, my screen time on my iPhone was up 217% last week. And I felt equally ashamed and proud of myself for attributing all of that to the week that was at the UTMB World Series Finals. And yeah, I don't know. What's up with you? Did you have a similar data insight, or I don't know? What's up?
Oh, yeah. For the setup, I had my desktop, which had all of the streaming stuff going. I had my laptop that had all the live tracking, all the chats, and then I had a Chromebook connected to my TV just playing the live stream. So I didn't use my phone too much. So like from a screen time standpoint, my phone thinks I still did okay. But when I was actually using 3 different computers for like 48 hours, it was pretty excessive, and I'm still recovering a little bit from it. But, kind of like we had said in our pre-race episode, like, who sleeps the night before Christmas, Like, there's time to recover now. We have a whole year.
At a certain point in the conversation, actually, maybe soon enough, I want to talk about your idea to do these UTMB watch parties, because I think they're really interesting. And one trend that I'm noticing in the media aspect of our sport is the internet equivalent of the hyper localization of fandom. So there are becoming these tribes of, let's call it 40 to 50 people that enjoy ultra running, that sort of latch together and watch things in union, discuss things in union. We see it on these like mini Discords, mini Slacks. And I think these UTMB watch parties are indicative of this trend. And I want to talk about that in a second. But there was one thing that I was waiting to tell you, and I think it's maybe a stretch comparison, but partly because of you, I've been investing way more into track and field viewing. And of course, I was watching the World Championships, and I saw the Noah Lyles press conference. It was the moment after he won the 200 when he said, "World champions of what?" in response to all those NBA players that call, winning the NBA finals, they call themselves world champions. And it made me think of the scene here at UTMB. We think of UTMB as sort of the Super Bowl of the ultra distance, but could you imagine a Noah Lyles equivalent, like the winners of the 80K world champs in Innsbruck this past June, saying the same thing to Jim and Courtney after their wins?
Oh, you're right. That just like UTMB champ, they're not the world champ. They weren't at the world championships. I know.
Come to Innsbruck.
I love Noah Lyles' comments on that, but at the same time, like, everyone knows that like the NBA is the most competitive league.
Yeah.
So it's we're just lucky to be in a sport where there actually is a true like global stage. But I mean, if anything, one country did such a good job of building out a league that they became the de facto global stage, because you get, and maybe that goes back to the whole, like, there is no ultra running league. There is no governing body. Like, you get the best basketball players in the world to come to the NBA. The goal is to not win worlds or the Olympics. It's to make it into the NBA. And like, I think by that reasoning of the NBA being that high caliber, when you win an NBA, like when you win a finals, you are the world champion because the entire world is trying to come play in your court.
It's also interesting to me that Noah Lyles is a rare combination of both hyper talented and one of the best, if not the best, at what he does, and also willing to go on a limb with comments like that. And track and field is so lucky because he overnight gave that sport probably tens of millions, hundreds of millions of impressions among fans in other sports. And at least for a brief moment, people turn to track and field and are saying like, what's going on here, for people that have never touched the sport, never watched it.
What do they say? There's no such thing as bad publicity.
No such thing as bad press.
Even Kevin Durant was like, "Oh, this boy." this guy here. And it's like, oh, snap. Kevin Durant's complaining about something another athlete said. That's amazing for track and field. I bet Noah Lyles like doubled his Instagram followers.
This episode is brought to you by Oladance, wireless Bluetooth headphones which deliver 19 hours of battery life, superior sound, the ability to safely hear your surroundings, and an open ear design so you don't get that achy feeling from wearing them for a long time. I've used these for the last 10 months of training and racing, and if you're curious, head over to oladance.com/ST and use code ST at checkout for $30 off their OWS2 headphones. Also, thanks to Pillar Performance, Pillar, spelled Pillar, is a sports micronutrition company that I was introduced to after having Sam Parsons from Tin Man Elite on the show a while back. I have been using their pineapple coconut flavored triple magnesium product, which delivers high potency magnesium glycinate for better sleep and added recovery during my training blocks. If you'd like to try Pillar today and you're an American based listener, head over to thefeed.com/pillar and use code SingleTrack in all caps for 15% off your order. For international listeners, that same code with that same discount will work on pillarperformance.shop. Finally, thanks to Kodiak Cakes, makers of my favorite pancakes. Their mixes aren't just delicious, they're also 100% whole grain and packed with 14 grams of protein per serving to immediately help with that recovery process. So if you want to try them yourself, head over to their website, get a few boxes of the mix, and use code SingleTrack15 at checkout for 15% off your next order. Oh yeah. No, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. He was thinking 3 or 4 steps down the road. But all right, just to provide a little bit of an index on what I think we'll cover here, I think we'll get a little bit into analyzing the UTMB live stream, their social media, their coverage during the race. I have a bunch of questions that I think we can discuss back and forth. So, for example, like, did Jim really need to move to France to win this race? Does Jim go on to win if Germain doesn't pass him at that moment before Champex-Lac? Has ultra running reached a point of competitiveness where it's impossible to win Western UTMB in the same year on the men's side? Our most memorable moments from the race, analyzing other parts of it, team analysis. So we got a lot here. I just wanted to put that out there. The first thing that I personally want to get into, we talked about this during the watch party. I think maybe it was you that highlighted this. There was a moment during the second watch party. It was at the Courmayeur aid station, and we had just finished watching all of the aid station theatrics for the top 10 men. And at that moment, they pivoted the live stream away from all of the tables and chairs there where the crews were, just as the lead women were starting to come through. And they went to that circle of commentators, and they switched between that discussion and like chopping cheese blocks at Arnaz, the next aid station. And I think it was you that was remarking, this is not good. Like, we're not giving the same amount of attention to the women's race as we were to the men's race. And I did want to highlight that there in case there are folks that only listen to the first, 10 or 20 minutes of this episode, because we talk a lot about concrete ways to make sure that the sport is covered equally on both sides of the aisle, and that we're growing all aspects of the sport, and making sure that there's equal coverage of both top tens seems to me, and probably to you and a lot of people, as one of the most tangible, concrete ways to grow the women's aspect of sports. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is that it was a complete and utter shit show at Courmayeur. Like, from a fan, like as a fan watching the live stream, which is what we were doing, we were fans of the sport, we were watching the live stream, it was a disaster. Because we got to watch the men come through. We got to watch through like 30th man come through. We got to watch just like after about 15th place came through. We got to watch explosion after explosion of people like sitting down, slumped over, trying to eat food, cameras in their faces. We're like, this is amazing. This is so cool. And then once Zach and Jim got close to what was the name of that aid station afterwards that there was going to be coverage on? R something
like that.
Once they got,
it was like Arnaz or something, Arnoise,
or maybe it was
or Bertone.
Yeah, because you came into Courmayeur, you left Courmayeur, and then you climbed up to Bertone, and then there was Refuge Bonatti, and then Arnavaz. Anyways, one of those ones. whichever one they were getting, they actually had cameras on and were ready to go live. They then switched coverage over to the imminent arrival of the men's leader, which turns out, which we watched it, the imminent arrival of the men's leader, it didn't happen for like at least another hour. Like they were ready for the men's leaders, just had cameras at that aid station. We were just watching two volunteers chop a giant wheel of cheese for like 60 minutes. And then occasionally they would switch back to Courmayeur, but it wouldn't be cameramen in the aid station, you know, filming the lead ladies coming through. Instead, it was just cameras on this like kind of living room beanbag setup they had of like Martin and Marianne and one other gentleman just talking about the race. And like occasionally you could see one of the ladies go behind them because they were literally like on the other side. Like we saw Leah go through kind of because she was like blurry in the background. And at the same time, we were missing nothing on the men's side of the race because they were running through the mountains in between aid stations. Why there was no camera coverage on what we had said before the race, very pivotal part of the race, and looking back at the race and the splits and how the men looked, that ended up being true. Most of the men who looked bad at Courmayeur did not have good races. Most of the men who looked good at Courmayeur ended up having good races. I wish we could have said the same for the lead women, but I think really all we got to see come through was like the top 3, maybe top 4.
Yeah.
So that was just super disappointing because you and I both, having done a decent amount of commentating work, which, I mean, they're not like, I mean, I don't know if there's a race that has a live stream that's on the same level as UTMB, but you and I have done commentating work for some fairly high profile races at this point. Working the races that we've worked with, they've always made a very strong point of equal coverage. Like even at Black Canyon, like purposely doubled up the number of people on course so they could leapfrog each other to make sure that no one got missed and we could follow both the men's and women's races. Like it took twice as many resources on the ground to make that happen. But as a result, we literally had twice as good of a live stream. And even from like a production standpoint, you know, the Matt who was producing Black Canyon, like he was always paying attention to what the men's and women's side, as well as you and I, because we also had the ability to flip between cameras or tell the producer to switch between this. And we were all on the same page. I think that's partly what it all is like everyone who's working at UTMB is not on the same page yet. Because like Corinne
Right.
Malcolm, for example, we are on the same page as Corinne in regards to fighting for equal coverage for these races. And Corinne had some of the best quotes of the entire live stream in regards to like telling cameramen. Because one thing that is different for like you and I working like some of Aerovipa's live streams versus how Corinne has to do the UTMB live stream is Corinne doesn't have the producer sitting right next to her. She can't just like pop over and be like, hey, Matt, go to camera 4. And then he's like, oh, okay. The producers are in a whole nother room. And like they only hear what she's saying, and then they have to go and look. And by that time, the moment might be over to instruct like the cameraman. Maybe it's because the production's so big, things happen slower. I think though that if I don't even want to know what it would have been like if Corinne wasn't there.
The good news is there are a lot of people. You mentioned Corinne. In addition to Corinne, there's a lot of good people, a lot of good organizations out there. The Pro Trail Runners Association comes to mind that are constantly lobbying UTMB to make change. And there's a whole laundry list of changes that these people, these groups have effectively changed outcomes on. So, for example, the pregnancy policy, top 10 recognition, the list goes on. And I'm an eternal optimist. And I do think that within the next year or two, this problem will be resolved. And I don't think we're going to have to face it again. I think that we will see pretty solid, equal, consistent coverage across the board at all these key aid stations and on course. I could be wrong, but I am an eternal optimist. I think there's just good people working on it, and they're influential and they're effective. And I think these people are only going to gain more influence and power over time too, which is a good thing. But yeah, so I think I'm glad that we pointed that out, because obviously, this is just a podcast, but I do think it's important to use the platform for good whenever you can. I also think it's just an obvious issue to take the stance we've taken on. Like, I think you look at like the Dacia issue for UTMB, and I do think there's really compelling arguments on both sides for that. Whereas with this scenario, there's really only like one point of view to take, and that is there should be the same amount of coverage for the women as there is for the men. So
yeah, and like the only counter argument that anyone's like I've ever heard people say is like, well, how do you know you're not fighting for something that, like UTMB? How do you know you're not fighting for a race that women just simply aren't as interested in doing? And my counter argument to that has always been, how could you potentially have that conclusion when the attempt to increase female participation in these races hasn't even been made yet? Like,
yeah,
you can't say in full confidence that women just don't want to run UTMB. That's why the participation rates are lower, is because the way that the whole system of these races has been set up is like it's encouraged more men to come run the races than women. And like that's an underlying problem with just like elite sport. Like professional sports as a whole has always been designed around success for men and not women.
Yeah.
Like hence, like men have never needed like a pregnancy deferral program. Like it's all these things that like, yeah, men haven't needed these sorts of things. And like that, does that mean that women don't either? It's like, no, I think the attempts should absolutely be made to increase participation, and then see later if, oh, maybe it isn't UTMB that's the race that wants to be run the most. But like no one knows that for sure.
I think maybe to summarize that, if we want to grow the women's side of the sport, you have to validate the race experience. That's one of the key components to growing that part of the sport, is by in the presentation part of it, in the live stream part of it, displaying a race that is just as important. I will say, despite that criticism, which I think is deserved, I continue to be a massive fan of UTMB. I think there's a lot of really cool things that they achieved over the course of the week. A lot of cool I loved their social media.
Dude,
I love
their Instagram social media manager deserves a raise. Whoever that is,
he does.
It's hilarious. Yeah. They need to get
the Courtney Jim hug.
They need to get promoted to the live stream team.
I know. The Zach pointing meme, the Courtney Jim hug, the footage of Jim passing Zach, the footage of Jim passing Germont. It was awesome.
Yep. Yeah. So many good highlights from UTMB's Instagram, which surprised me, because like I'm not the only one who thinks the UTMB website is garbage. Like it's impossible to navigate it. The UTMB, the live stream at times was amazing, but like, there was problems. My bar was set somewhat low for UTMB's actual Instagram page. And you're right. Like it's been fantastic the entire race.
Well, typically when you have a massive organization, or relatively big organization that tries to do social media right, there's so much bureaucracy involved. Like the person who posts everything has to get approval from 6 or 7 people before publishing, and it gets watered down as a result. It seems like, just based on appearances, it seems like the person that was in charge of publishing the content had full editorial control to just like get an idea and be like, I just think this is going to work. Let's just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like it's some funny person who accidentally figured out the password to the UTMB Instagram page, and like no one, and like now they're like, it's actually working pretty well. Let's not kick this person out. We could have a real your boy Scott Jurek situation on our hands with the UTMB Instagram page, where it's like maybe UTMB doesn't even know who's running it.
There's a lot more that I think we have to cover about the media side of things, but just to sort of bop back and forth between the race itself and the media, I do want to talk about the race for a second. first question, because we put this out on Instagram, we put out a questionnaire. Hey, what do you think Bret and I should talk about during this episode? There were 7 different people that posed this question, so I'll pose it here to you. Did Jim really need to move to France to win this race? And does Zach's challenge in second place finish contest this theory of needing to be there in the French Alps year round to win?
I don't think everyone needs to move to France to win UTMB. I think Jim needed to move to France to win UTMB. I think there was some training habits that Jim had that were bad for UTMB prep that weren't going to get fixed training anywhere in the US, because you're still in the US. He needed to go to France to kind of like reinvent himself as a runner, as a mountain runner. He needed to learn what it is that the French are focusing on, how they're preparing for this race and then executing it. It sounds like Zach actually figured a lot of that out too. Both Jim and Zach didn't really talk much about the overall miles that they were running leading up to this race. Zach was much more vocal about it, saying like, yeah, I didn't care about miles. It was just all about hitting vert and, time. Well, you hit the vert, the time will come. Miles, it's whatever. Jim kind of said the same thing, where after his ankle injury, he was just getting in a lot of like beefy hiking and a little bit of uphill running and then lots of descending. That sounds very similar to me than to what Zach was doing. So like they both changed the way that they train a little bit and like didn't focus on the actual end of week mileage number. And yeah, maybe Zach didn't need to move to France to figure that out. But I think Jim did need to move to France to figure out, what he needed to change within his training. Because we are still kind of talking the way of like, I guess maybe I don't know is this up for debate? Like, who's had a better ultra running career to this point, like Jim Walmsley or Zach Miller? My vote goes, even prior to UTMB, my vote goes to Jim Walmsley. Like, I think hands down, even though Zach perhaps maybe has even had more viral moments than Jim, which is hard to beat.
I think one of Zach's greatest contributions to the elite running community in ultras is he's one of the few people who proved that you can really fly pretty close to the sun in terms of quote unquote overtraining, get injured, be out of the sport for a long time, like 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And then actually like come back from it not just come back and
better.
be like, come back better, or at least as good. But
I think this is the best Zach. This is the best Zach I've ever seen in terms of running. Yeah. But I guess where I was going with that whole point was like, I think Jim still has had some bigger race results than Zach. So if you are like the de facto number 1 ultra runner in the US, who is Jim going to learn from? There's no one else for him to learn from. So he had to go become neighbors with Francois Dehaene. Like, that's genius. Like, why not just go be neighbors with the person who's won the race 4 times and learn how to do it? Like, it makes total sense to me. And you know what? Jim won and Zach didn't. I don't know, but like Zach's lifestyle though is much more what's the word I'm looking for? Like driftery, dirtbaggy, kind of like, he built out his school. Vagabond. That's a much more I don't know, appropriate sounding. That doesn't really seem to fit into the French lifestyle to me. Whereas the way Jim lived and trained was like very much hunkered down in one spot. Like, if you look at Jim's Western State training, it's so boring. He does the same 6 runs like over and over and over and over. They all just get a little bit faster over the course of the week. Like, he doesn't do any exploring. And perhaps he needed to do a little bit of exploring to grow as a runner. And, moving to France checks those boxes as well.
I really liked what you said about breaking bad training habits and needing to go see Sensei Dehaene to really make the final finishing moves here in training. All right. First of all, before I get into it, for the record, I was and continue to be a huge fan of the move to France. I thought, generally speaking, symbolically, it was a watershed moment, or one of the few wake-up call moments of the era for pros of the sport, to realize how far we've come and what the new standards are for training specifically to achieve peak performance. Like Tom Evans is another one of these people, but I think Jim's move was another one of those symbolic moments. That said, and I think you said this too, so I'm kind of agreeing, I don't think he necessarily needed to move to France to win. I just think in addition to breaking those bad training habits, he needed to stop doing the Western States UTMB double for a moment and just slightly commit more to this race. Because with the training habit stuff, there's still a question mark there for me because we haven't seen his Strava. We haven't seen what his Strava looked like in the last 3 to 4 months. I would be really curious to see how it compared to some of those massive years out in the San Juans in like 2017, 18, 19.
Totally.
But I think there are some people out there that said after this win, I told you so. This is how it needed to play out. Like this was one of the coolest tweets on Twitter. I saw Dom Grossman's tweet that he retweeted from 2017 where he said, like, if an American wants to win this race one day, here's what you got to do. And like the bottom line was go to France, go to the French Alps. And maybe Dom is right. Maybe, that crowd is right. Maybe the delta between Jim's win and Zach's second place 21-minute back finish is a move to the French Alps, but I'm not convinced yet. And maybe the delta is working with Francois, but I don't know. Like there's a part of me that thinks the biggest thing Jim needed to like pull off his plate was Western States. And like last year was just kind of like some in-race strategic errors. Like he could have done it last year. I think the biggest thing was taking Western States off his plate though.
See, I think the biggest thing that Jim took off his plate that helped with his UTMB prep was the distractions of living and training in the US when you're Jim Walmsley. Like any of the major training hubs that Jim goes to in the US, it's everyone, like all the runners would know him. Like if Jim's in Flagstaff, there's he has to go run with people, it's social, etc. If Jim moves to Silverton, every single person in Silverton knows Jim. If Jim moved to Salt Lake, it would be a big deal. If Jim moved to Boulder, like it would be a big deal. Jim had to go find this tiny little crevasse in the middle of, in the French Alps where there's like 85 people in his village where he could not be like, he just had less training distractions, or not less training distractions. He had less distractions outside of his training. And that kind of goes back to what we've been saying a lot about just the difference between full-time pro runner and not full-time pro runner. Jim almost had to take that to like one more level of eliminating as much distractions as possible. One thing, we see that a lot in other professional sports. Like I have no idea what kind of training the top NFL players are doing. It's like very much under lock and key, and it's in like private facilities, no distractions. Courtney Dauwalter is very good at eliminating training distractions as well, and like external, influencers. And that's one of the other notes that I had written down for like why Jim needed to move to France, was so that way his mind and like all the chatter could get a little bit more quiet, or maybe it's the same volume, but it's at least just now in a language he doesn't speak. And that's, I think that helps a lot too. My follow-up question then to that is, does Jim need to stay in France to win UTMB again?
To add to that point, because I think it's a great point, the solitude as strategy play. Jim and Courtney do it great. Courtney has sort of sequestered herself away up there in Leadville. Amazing. Germain Grangier, who took third at this race, and Katie Scheid have the exact same strategy.
Yep,
they
exactly.
Very deliberately moved to a remote location in the French Alps. They also live away from, the ultra running riffraff. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point.
And
now to your question,
Zach does that too, actually, the way that he lives in training. So we're just like, we're uncovering something in real time, I think, right now.
But your question was, does Jim need to stay in France to keep this going?
To win UTMB again? Or did he learn enough? Like, will he fall back into American training habits moving back to the States?
Okay. So this question works really well with the question I was going to ask you, and I'll just state it and then I'll try to answer it and we can kind of go back and forth. And my question to you was going to be, career-wise, now that Jim's won Western a bunch of times, he got over the hump with UTMB, he's got all these other great accolades to his name. What does he do career-wise? How does he chart his next steps? And I was listening and I was watching, I can't remember if it was a Free Trail or an I Run Far interview, but he essentially said that in this day of age, you can no longer come into any of these marquee races if you aren't absolutely stoked and absolutely willing to subject yourself to the hardest training. Like the motivation from end to end has to absolutely be there. And even if it's off a little bit, like just as a rule, you're out of contention.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of goes on to say that like the center point of his calculus for these future races is what objective will motivate him the most to train hard. So for me, I don't know if it's the location that matters most. It's just like what is lighting Jim up, and which type of training block paired with which race gives him the best shot at evolution. Because he talks about like how with every single year that passes by in the sport, the most important thing to him is evolving as a runner, growing as an athlete. And I found that fascinating because like he's very clearly at the mountaintop. He was kind of already at the mountaintop before he won UTMB, but when you're at the level he's at, when you're at the level Courtney's at, I mean, you're seeing with this with Courtney. Courtney has accomplished so much in the sport that she had to invent. She didn't invent it because Chrissy Mail had done it before, but she pursued this super contrived Western States hard rock UTMB triple, ostensibly to keep things exciting, to keep things fresh, to grow, to challenge herself. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't think he needs to stay in France. I think he just needs to do training and racing that excites him.
Okay, this is what I think. This is just me being like, this is what, if I was Jim Walmsley, this is the challenge that would excite me for next year. One, clearly it's doing the double because like winning UTMB fresh, fully focused, he did it. He can't do it again because that's not any more impressive than this year.
Yeah.
He has to do the Western States UTMB double. But if Jim moves to Flagstaff and trains for Western States, that's not exciting either because he's done that so many times. Jim needs to train for and win Western States from Europe. Because that's really hard. That apparently we kind of talk about that every year too, where it's like perhaps maybe even harder to win Western States from Europe as winning UTMB from the States. Jim's so good at running Western States. Maybe this is the challenge for him is can he win it from France? And then that would help with his UTMB double.
So it's intriguing. It's a fun challenge, and it would be one of those really cool "I told you so's" or like anything you can do, I can do better. Like I have so much range and so much natural talent that you could put me in Antarctica, like training on one of those scientific bases. That's classic Jim.
Yeah.
But we've also seen like 5 different eras and personalities of Jimmy sort of evolved over the years, and
Euro Jim is going to win Western States.
But does the current version of Jim philosophically value training specificity in sort of that Tom Evans school of, I don't want to risk putting myself out of contention for this race because I just believe in I exalt specificity, whether it's in the type of workouts or it's the terrain I'm on, being in the course arena. I don't know. It would be so fun. I mean, I would love to see, as a fan, I would love to see it, but like, I just don't know if Jim's willing to risk it.
Well, because it still seems like everyone who does the Western States UTMB double puts all their eggs in the Western States basket first and then tries to get specific for UTMB for 6 weeks. What if someone did it the other way around, where they were largely training for UTMB, but then just did a little bit of Western States specific like training? Like if Jim's training for UTMB, his body can hold up to the demands of Western States. Like the variables for Jim training for Western States are like, can he run continuously fast enough to win Western States? Because that's unlike UTMB training. And 2, the heat and all that stuff. Maybe because Jim is so dialed at Western States. I mean, he's won it 3 times, like seemingly training for it 3 different ways, and yet still no one's pressing him. Maybe Jim only needs to train, like at 80% effort for states and still mostly stay in UTMB shape. And that's good enough to win states. I think that's the argument, is like, is Jim the last living human on earth that could potentially knock out the Western States UTMB double on the men's side?
I was just going to say, I think that the only logical, interesting thing to do next summer from a career progression, training, and racing interest standpoint is for him to do that. And so I actually put this in my notes. Zach Bitter had a really interesting question on Twitter where he says, has ultra running, at least on the men's side, reached a point of competitiveness where it's basically impossible to win Western and UTMB in the same year? And I do think, like you kind of just alluded to, Jim is one of the few that could do it, because we have reached a point where if you want to win both races, you have to be in at a fitness level to run probably well under sub 15 at Western, and then increasingly well under sub 20 at UTMB to do it. And I have to imagine that's incredibly intriguing to Jim. And the next step for him is showing not just his range year over year, but his capacity to demonstrate range in a 3-month time frame, which is very difficult.
Yeah. I guess only time will tell, because he hasn't said. Well, the one thing he did say is he's going for a golden ticket at Nice next month. So, like, Jim is clearly trying to get into Western States. The one thing that hasn't been confirmed is if he's going to defend his title at UTMB. So, like, you know, barring disaster, I mean, it sounds like Jim's recovery is actually going well. It doesn't even sound like he's too trashed from the race this past weekend. So, for just assumption's sake, Jim's running Western States next year.
I know you know way more about cycling. You're more tuned in than I am, so correct me on this. But when you think about like the maturation process of a sport, you typically know a sport is like saturated from a competitive standpoint when athletes have to become truly specialists and they have to really focus and emphasize on like a singular race, at least in a part of the year. You know, Lance Armstrong used to always talk about how for him, year after year, it was peaking at the right time for the tour. I think, what's his name? Miguel Indurain had sort of the same philosophy.
Yeah.
Do you think Jim, in like the era that we're in, this is one of the last chances for an athlete to do that? And maybe by the end of this decade, for example, we'll just see those two races as complete discrete entities, and they're so saturated from a competitive standpoint. There are so many multiples of Killian and Jim out there that you couldn't even imagine winning both in the same calendar year.
Maybe, and I'm curious what the answer will be like now versus a decade from now, but like, how different are Western States and UTMB? I know like right now they're very different. It's impossible to train for both. But like even in the cycling world, like we're seeing like the generational talent that is Wout van Aert. Like he's a cyclocross national champion. Like we're talking like a 45-minute race. One of the best like Grand Tour sprinters in the world. That's like, it doesn't get much more specific than that. But he's still able to win cyclocross. He's able to win like sprint stages in the Tour. 2022 Tour de France, he won one of the biggest mountain stages because he can also climb. And he's also one of the best single day classics, like one day race riders to ever do it. There's still like, there's always going to be that generational talent that has the potential to just be good at everything.
Yeah.
So like, it almost like, yeah, it's cycling. It was like, you are very, very much specialist, but then this dude, Wout, just comes in and just everything that's ever been said, he just throws it out the window and is good at everything. So then it's like,
that reminds me.
Well, shit. What if Jim's that guy in ultra running?
Well, okay, you just reminded me because you were talking about, you know, how do we compare and contrast the difficulties and the challenges of Western and UTMB? This is probably an idea for the live stream conversation. In cycling, they do a really good job of saying like, you know, this race has X number of category 1 climbs, or, you know, this race has, you know, this many 4 or 5 star, you know, technical
like
terrain
cobble sections. Yeah.
It'd be kind of cool to see like, you know, these live streams incorporate those descriptions in, so the audience, we have a bigger, more context and appreciation for what they're
I think
going through.
that was brought up. What was that brought up this morning or yesterday in the Discord channel of like, can we get some
Simon?
can we get some like universal categorization for these races. And I love that idea because even in gravel racing, if you look at any of the major gravel race websites, there's kind of like a universal 1 through 5 category, because not all gravel is created equal. Just like how all single track trail isn't just all single track trail. Like some is more technical than others. The gravel world has a categorization system of like, the first 20% of the course are category 1 gravel. So it's like barely worse than a paved road. And then there's like a couple sections of category 4 gravel where it's like mega chunky. And a lot of that's that way people can figure out like what kind of tires, what kind of PSI, like optimize their gear for it. But then it also gives the fan points of reference on the course of more than just an elevation profile. You see that like in Paris-Roubaix, they have like 15 different cobblestone sections, but not all cobblestone sections are even created equal. They say some are more difficult than others. In all the major grand tours, all the stages have climbs, and just like at UTMB, we can see on the elevation profile how big the climb is. But what if they were categorized just in a 1 through 5 system of like which one's a more manageable climb, which one's actually more difficult? They did do a little bit of that when they were showing the elevation profiles of the climbs on the UTMB live stream, where like the gradient of the climb would get broken down into different colors. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But at the same time, like how many people actually understand the difference between like a 12% gradient and a 19% gradient? What if you could just say, yep, this climb's a category 1, the other climb's a category 3. It's like, well, category 1's really hard. So it's like, that must be a bigger deal. So I think UTMB is like nearly there, but it would be really cool if there was, again, lack of governing body. If there was a governing body that could just agree that like these are the categories for the climbs and maybe also the descents, and then like categories for the technicality of the terrain.
All right. There was another question posed by our audience on Instagram, and it revolved around what storylines will people like you and I, the American trail running media, pivot to in the wake of this American male victory at UTMB finally being achieved. I think as I was thinking about this question, one of the immediate ones that came to mind was, okay, maybe the next, incessant talking point is when will a head-to-head victory for an American like Jim happen at UTMB over someone like Kilian or Francois? So that's a low-hanging fruit one. But the one that I want to pose here, and I'll be curious if you have any thoughts on this, but also any other talking points. This one I think is more widespread across genders. Let me pull up this data. So I looked this up. Only 25 of the top 340 male and female runners with an elite UTMB index score listed on the Fantasy Free Trail site for this year's UTMB were under the age of 30. So that's about 7% of the total quote unquote elite competitors across genders at this race. Tells me a lot of things. The first one is that this particular race, the 100-mile distance, is not necessarily a young person's game. And we're currently relying on a lot of people from the American side to sort of pull things together for us. And these people are either at the top of their game right now, or they're starting to get older. Like, there's not really any evidence that he's declining, but Zach Miller is going to be 36 years old next year. Tim Tollefson will be 39 next year. I think David Laney is going to be 35 or 36. Like that whole 2015 Nike contingent, they're starting to age out. So my question, I think the next cool storyline is, who are the members of the next generation? Who is waiting in the wings to pick up on the work of people like Laney, Tollefson, Jim, Tyler Green, who I think is going to be 39 next year as well on the men's side? What does this transition look like? I feel like Adam Peterman's a part of this. Drew Holman, Puma, Jeff Colt, Mogavero, John Ray, Rod Farver. Like this is the next generation. So I think on the men's side, one of the great talking points is, are these people stepping up? Are these people contending for podiums and wins at UTMB? On the women's side, Courtney's 39 next year. So who's taking up the mantle after her? Leah, Sabrina, Taylor, Helena Faulkner, Aaron Clark. I think one of the new interesting storylines to me is this cycling in of this new generation and putting the onus on them to represent the U.S. at the highest level.
I mean, one point that I thought almost seemed like, I don't know if it was contradictory or not, but it's like you said that 7% of the people of the elites on Fantasy Free Trails lineup were under the age of 30.
Yeah.
So that means that everyone who's running in the race right now, who's like in their 30s, maybe even mid to late 30s, for the sake of these results, they're all in their prime UTMB shape. Like,
Yeah.
they're clearly better than the youth at UTMB. So then it's like, who's going to take over? Well, I mean, just looking through the top men and women, most of them potentially have 3 or 4 more years of dominance in them. Like, there's only a couple people who are like, I'd be surprised if they don't start declining. But like, if Courtney's 39 next year and she's having the year that she had this year, and Courtney decides she wants to win UTMB next year, I expect her to win UTMB next year. I probably expect her to win UTMB the year after that, probably the year after that. Well, it's like, shoot, now we got to be looking into the people who are like maybe turning 30 right now or 31 right now. They might be the ones who are actually winning UTMB in the next 5 years, because it might actually be like 35 years old, not 30.
Yeah.
So then it's like, we're looking really far down the line of who potentially is in this new contingent of runners. The first, like, of there's a similar scenario to this that happened in 2016. We're going back to track and field again. Sorry for any of the non-track and field fans out there, but 2016 Rio Olympics, 1500 meters. Matthew Centrowitz wins the gold medal, and it's the other 2 Americans who made it for the 1500 team are like very much in Centro's cohort of age. At that time, we're looking ahead to the 2020, like the Tokyo Olympics, and we're like, dude, who is going to replace these Americans in the mile? There does not appear to be anyone who's younger that's running like, who has the potential to be even close to what, Centro just did, and these other people, because they were actually too young. They didn't even like really exist yet. Like Cole Hawker and Jared Naguse, they were like seniors in high school, freshmen in college in 2016. So like, still so far away from that like no one could have predicted. And then by the Tokyo Olympics and this most recent World Championships, like Matthew Centrowitz's generation has for the most part been like pretty much completely replaced by all these people that we had no idea really even existed in 2016.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have no idea who the next great like American 100 milers are going to be, because they might not even exist yet. Like, there's still people coming onto the scene who are like runners, and then in 2 years are amazing. Like, I mean, Adam Peterman did it last year. Like,
Right.
the year before that, would you have said Adam Peterman will be one of the best ultra runners in the world? It's like, why would you have any basis or like evidence to say that? Like,
he had some really impressive trail marathon and 50K results like Speedgo and Moab, but you're right. A lot of these instances, they do somewhat come out of nowhere.
But like, yeah, like you'd be insane to be like, oh yeah, that guy, he's definitely winning Western States next year. You'd be like, on basis of what? A good trail marathon? No way. But I guess the point that I'm making is like, the people that are in the top 10, 20 at UTMB, like, I don't think that someone who's young and 20th necessarily even has a great chance to move up a whole bunch. Like, maybe a lot of these people are running close to their ceiling regardless of what age they're at. And like, there's room for that 1-2% improvement. But like, how many of these people do we even see across the results where we're like, there's a few where we're like, they left a ton of time on the table, but there's not that many. So like, the next UTMB champs might not even be in this UTMB field or even the CCC field. And that's super cool. I think that's really exciting that it just, like, it's, I don't know. Like, again, going back to the dodgeball quote of like, we don't know who our best player is. We haven't run UTMB yet. I haven't run a trail race yet.
I think we actually maybe talked about this specific fact explicitly in our UTMB preview episode, but if either of us had to guess, I think we said that the average elite career span for somebody in ultra running is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 years, which is equivalent to the lifespan of an NFL running back. It's just such a punishing sport. And Jim, Courtney, Zach, they are all extreme outliers. They've been at least competitively relevant, those three, since like 2015, 2016. But I would argue that for most of their cohort competitively became irrelevant like 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not going to go into naming names because I don't want to put anybody on blast. And I do want people from that cohort to surprise us. But a lot of the people that were synonymous with that era are no longer relevant for this year's Western, this year's UTMB. And so the reason I bring up that talking point is more like, we got to be ready. We got to be on our toes because these things cycle so fast, and we get used to these names, and they gain name recognition, familiarity. We wish them well, but just due to the punishing nature of the sport, they're out of it after a while. So who's waiting in the wings? And like you said, it is tough to predict. It's tough to say, oh, because this person, smashed it at Broken Arrow and, is doing some cool stuff on this local scene. Naturally they're going to make this amazing jump to the 100-mile distance. That's a really tough way to connect the dots, but it's a fun storyline to think about. Thanks to Brooks for their support of our UTMB coverage. I've been a fan of this shoe brand ever since using their Cascadia 8 on my 2014 thru hike of the Appalachian Trail. They've now got a new and improved Cascadia 17 out, as well as a high point apparel collection like this rain jacket that I'm wearing right now. Head over to brooksrunning.com/singletrack to check it all out. Also, thanks to Morton. Morton fueled over 80% of my run during the 100-mile wilderness earlier this month. I used 25 of their hydrogels and 10 of their 225C bars in the process. They all went down easy. There was no palate fatigue, and the all-natural ingredients made me feel good throughout. These are also the same products used by top athletes like Tom Evans and Kilian Jornet. So head over to Morton.com to take a look and maybe even to try some yourself. Finally, thanks to Features, makers of my favorite trail running socks. They're durable, they're stylish, they're comfortable. And again, these are also trusted by many of the best athletes in our sport. If you'd like to give them a try, head over to their website, grab a few pairs, and use code SingleTrack20 at checkout for 20% off your next order.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think would you say that we are seeing like these massive increases in performance or like quote unquote surprises at UTMB on the women's field? Do you think we're seeing that because like you and I just weren't as familiar with like say the international women's field as we should have been? Or if the women's field is still just that much more open where you're more likely to see the like quote unquote like random baller breakouts than on the men's side? Because we always have called ultra running like the Wild West in terms of, everyone's training for the races completely differently, in terms of like training theory, as well as like race day execution. Are we still seeing that even more on the women's side? Because I feel like the secrets to female endurance, is still yet to be unlocked in an even further way as the men's side. I guess where I'm going with that is like, I think that's really exciting because we're like, there's still so much more room, I think, for the professionalization of the women's side of the race to improve. And I think as more brands, get behind that, which we're seeing it, like I feel like we've seen it this year almost more than other years in the past of just increasing this professionalization. I mean, one of the teams that comes to mind is the Terex team. Like you had a great podcast with the Terex team manager and how like their budget from their men's and women's team is 50-50 in terms of like the amount that they spend or pay the men versus women. Like it's 50, like they're probably the only team that does that. Like Lululemon launched an entire new trail team, and the whole focus of that is science-based studies around like unlocking the I guess secrets or the human potential of like females in endurance sport. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this whole point anymore, but like I just think it's super fascinating where like that side's gonna end up going.
So was one of the questions, did any of the results inside the women's top 10, for example, surprise us? Was that one of the questions?
Yeah, like, or I just feel like there to me there seemed to be more surprises and like almost less predictability than on the men's side. What do you think?
Gosh, I actually felt across the board in the men's and the women's top 10, there were very few surprises to me. The only person in the women's top 10 that I was surprised to see there was Lucy Bartholomew, finishing 10th in running, I believe the second fastest 10th place finish of all time on the women's side. And I was only surprised because obviously historically she's got great caliber, great capacity to be amazing in this sport dating back to 2016, 17, 18. But I know she had just gone through a tough stretch from like an energy availability standpoint, injury standpoint. So similar to Zach Miller, I was just surprised that this was the year things appeared to start resurrecting and she's getting back to form. But I felt like everybody else inside the women's top 10, maybe switching up the places a little bit, just based on their body of work going into the race, deserve to be there. And I think, I don't want to pat us too much on the back, but I think we did a pretty good job both on the women's and the men's side, like acknowledging those people and expecting them to be up there, like especially the women's podium, Courtney, Katarina, Blandine. I think for both of us, they were within our in that section where we talked about podium contenders. They were there.
So I guess perhaps maybe me saying that there was more surprises was because like my my fantasy free trail for UTMB, like my scorecard was one of the worst that I've ever done, ever. Like, and this is I went in with like so much confidence because I got 8th at CCC for fantasy free trail. And then like I backed that up with like a 1300th out of 1400 in UTMBs. So like my top 10 picks were like not even anywhere close to what I thought the race was going to end up coming out. So like, I mean, and I guess that's just the nature of UTMB as well, is like that's why like fantasy free trail goes 10 deep instead of 5, because it's so hard to even pick a handful that were in the top 10. But I mean, I guess one of the biggest surprises, which we were, trying, there was no answers over the course of the entire race, was like Esther Chilog dropping out like very early in the race. She had an Instagram post saying that she went into the race sick, virus of some sort, and was hoping for the best. And then like very early on, it was like, yeah, this isn't happening. So, but we didn't learn that until I didn't learn that till this morning. So that was one of like the big ones that was a bummer. And then like, Ruth Croft not starting either. I did edit my picks for that. But then like, I had like at like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had 6 on my women's field in my top 10 who did not score me any points that I thought was like, oh yeah, they'll definitely score points. So maybe that's why I said like I had more surprises in this race than I thought. Maybe because I just had poor picks.
Yeah, I think the big surprises for me was it like you just said, it came down to who started, who didn't start, and then extremely early attrition and drops early in the race. I guess this has been somewhat dispelled. Like I had reached out to some of the pros on Discord who've done this before, and just texting people and reaching out in various ways. I started to get paranoid that all of like these athlete houses in Chamonix were just these massive germ shelters. And while they're great in theory because they allow these athletes to come together, to bond, to have a place to train out of for the summer, in the week leading up to a race, when you're tapering and maybe your immune system is at one of its most vulnerable points, I feel like it's a huge risk. And like you can get sick. I don't know if this is what happened to Ruth, but you can get sick. You're susceptible. And then you're no longer on the UTMB start line. And that was one of the big opinions I formed after this year's race, was like, if I'm a pro, even with that cool ambiance at these team houses, I'm getting my own solo Airbnb and just going in isolation for the week before the race.
You have to trust that everyone, all your roommates are going to be equally as much of a germaphobe as you are in order for this to work. Like that's really so much of what it is. And like, it's always hard. Like, I mean, it's how the pandemic started, people. But yeah, I guess to a point, like to an extent, though, you just have to weigh out your pros and cons of like, because I love like some of my best training like memories ever, like cross country training camp where we would all go to Tahoe and rent a cabin for like a week or 10 days and just put in like a big training block and like 24/7 you're hanging out with your team the whole time. Like it's amazing. And like that makes me a better runner. But at the expense of like really risking not starting because you might get sick, that's tough. That sucks.
I've got some interesting aid station fireball stats about the women's race to read. I know we're sort of jumping around a bit here, but maybe this is a good place to insert it. The women's podium spread was 53 minutes. It was the third tightest ever. Only 2017 and 2018 were tighter. And the top 10 finisher spread based on time was the fourth tightest ever. Only 17, 18, and 19 were tighter. The women's 10th place finisher, Lucy Bartholomew, as we mentioned, that was the second fastest 10th place finish ever. Her 27:39 puts you on the women's podium in any year before 2013 and in the top 5 in any year before 18, except for 14. So just indicative that the women's field's getting more competitive. These races are getting faster, and it takes a lot more to get a top 10. I thought that was really cool.
One thing about that,
yeah.
That was interesting is like you said, like, you know, third tightest podium, or top 10. All of the years that were better than that were all very recent. So like if you look at the large term trend line, it's that the more recent years of UTMB on the women's side have gotten significantly more competitive than years prior to that.
Yep.
The race, the women's depth of the race is definitely trending in the right direction.
Yeah. And I know, and we've spent a lot of time talking about this and we'll continue to, that this was a great year for American men at UTMB snagging the top 2 spots, Tyler getting 7th. This was the first year that North American, so including, Canada, for example, in there, the first year North American females have had more than 3 in the overall top 10. So you had Leah, Sabrina, Courtney, and then Elsa McDonald, which is kind of cool. So this was, not to be forgotten. This was a great year for North American females.
I would also say it was a pretty good year for the Western States UTMB double.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, oh, shoot, I don't have it pulled up on this computer of the people that were going to do the double. So, I mean, Courtney, this was Courtney's first attempt at the double, I believe. And yep. Courtney smashed the double record. Her combined time at Western States at UTMB was about 3 hours faster than Rory Bozio, who had the top one. And then Leah, who also did the successful Western States UTMB double, now has the 5th fastest Western States UTMB double. Who am I missing? Well, I guess the ones that didn't pan out was like Taylor Nolan and Esther Chilog. Tyler Green had a very successful Western States UTMB double, the fastest, right?
Fastest ever.
By, what was it? Was it 6 minutes?
4 minutes.
4 minutes over Matthew Blanchard. Was it Matthew? No, who is it?
Matthew. It was Matthew.
This year.
Yep.
Okay. Wait, who beat who this year at UTMB? Did
Matthew beat Tyler, but if you take Tyler's Western States, which was faster than Matthew's, and you add that together with his UTMB, it was 15 something and 15:04 and 21:19.
Yeah. So once Matthew finished UTMB, I can only assume that someone's yelling at Tyler halfway down La Flégère, Tyler, you have to finish in under 21:25 or else Matthew has a faster combined Western States UTMB double than you. And then clearly Tyler kicked it in super hard to make sure that he had the fastest double ever. So pretty cool that 1 and 2 got set in the same race.
There's probably only 6 people in the entire world that would have that body of facts at their disposal, as well as the interest in chanting out said facts and relaying.
Yeah, no one told that to Tyler. Who knows? Maybe Tyler knew. I don't know. I bet Tyler's very calculated. in terms of his racing. Which there was a great tweet that was going around that showed like the active movement over the course of the race of people in their places. And I was looking at Tyler Green. I watched him start at the bottom and slowly move all the way up. And I was like, textbook Tyler Green. But then what I didn't even realize until thinking about it was that textbook Tyler Green, his name at least existed at the start of the race at the very bottom of the placement. Ludo Pomeray was not even on the list. Tyler went from like 38th to 7th. Ludo went from 50th to 5th. So he was 50th place at the first checkpoint and then finished 5th place. So what I said was actually textbook Tyler was actually textbook Ludo. And like that was just one of my favorite stats from the whole race. I mean, there was a stat going around that Ludo ran an hour faster this year and got 4 places worse than in 2016 when he won the race. And like, that's a fine stat, but like 2016 was actually pretty hot that year.
Yeah.
The stat that I just think was the most fascinating was he started out in 50th and just moved all the way up to 5th. And was just like running such a smart race.
Which kind of busts. It's one of those outlier performances for what it takes to stay in contention or to put yourself in a position to be, win podium top 10 at this race. He's always been one of those like
he's always been a little against the grain.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because he races Western states the exact opposite.
I know.
Like he was like leading through 50K in 2022. And then he was still in the top 10 through, Robinson Flat this year. And yet he goes through the first checkpoint at UTMB in 50th. It's just very interesting that like Ludo is one of those people where like I can't predict him at all. And like Ludo just does Ludo things and then it just works.
A couple more things I wanted to say about the women's race. So there's and this person did it for the men's race as well. I think you kind of just mentioned it, but there's a really cool Twitter visualization out there that shows the trading of places and how people moved up over the race. One of the interesting facets of this women's race to me was the relative stability of the top 10, almost from start to finish. There was a little bit of trading of places within, but for the vast majority of the race, Courtney, Blandine, Katarina, and Fu Zhao mostly held rank, which kind of falls in line with what we were saying before the race about how the women's race compared to the men's tends to be decided earlier, and it stays that way. And that did seem to play out in this year's edition.
Yeah. That was definitely something I noticed as well, is that there was moves within kind of like the run for the race for second place was awesome, like with second, third, and fourth battling all day. But at the same time, it was the same second, third, and fourth from like more or less the very beginning of the race. And one thing that like my wife Maddie pointed out, because she was like watching Leah's tracker the entire time, and there was like a maybe 8 to 10 hour stretch in the second half of the race where anyone, like men or women, Leah passed like one person. Like she very much hit the pace equilibrium with where she was in the race. And like like things just didn't move too much because she was still running well. But Anthony, when we did our second watch party and Anthony Costalis was at your house, he brought up a really great spot, like a great point, because Leah had just moved up into 8th place around Courmayeur. And we were like, oh man, according to the stats, she could still run her way on the podium. And Anthony's like, yes, I hear what you're saying, but Leah now has to catch 7th, 6th, 5th, and 4th, who are also all trying to run themselves onto the podium. So like there's a good chance the people in front of her are starting to speed up. She has to speed up even more. And when we're getting into the age of running where we're seeing less colossal blowups, it is in a way getting tougher to run your way up through the field. And it's interesting that we saw that more on the women's field than the men's.
And it makes me wonder, this is extrapolating a little bit, thinking into the future, given that especially among the professional class of ultra runners, there are less blowups. There is going to be this pack of, let's call them aspiring pros, people that are borderline pros that are trying to still achieve similar position, do we see a whole new era and round of blowing up as that type of athlete decides, because of the nature of ultra running now, I have no choice but to push the envelope to stay relevant. And, I become more of this like mercurial type runner where it's like either I'm getting top 5 or podium, or it's just like not my day and I'm blowing up at Courmayeur.
So putting my coaching hat on for a sec, if I have an athlete who like has the potential to one day be very good at UTMB, I don't want them to just their first UTMB go out with the front and blow up and then try it again and maybe blow up a little bit later. And then like one day, maybe you won't blow up. I would love them to first 2 times, run their own race, execute their race to the best of their fitness abilities, learn what it's like to be hammering at the end of the race, not get into the habit of falling into survival mode late, even if it means you're not going to win this year. I think like learning the X's and O's of like the execution is more important, because like if they have that chance of winning, then I don't think I'm having this conversation with them. But I think for like the up and comers, any sport, you got to learn the fundamentals first before you can become a world champion in the NBA finals of America, of the world. But like I think if you just go in and keep trying to bash your head against the wall, most of the time the wall doesn't break.
You got to chop wood, carry water for a bit.
I think, yeah. So I think we're still going to see some young people like potentially not blowing up in the races if they have coaches that care about their long-term development, which ultimately is going to go back to like the lengthening of careers in the sport as well as like playing the long game. Like you see like Kilian Jornet has become more public about how he's played the long game this whole time. He back when he was younger, like even like 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of his interviews, like he wouldn't go into his training. He's like, oh yeah, I don't run during the winter. I only ski. But now this year he's like, okay, yeah, I'm still running on a treadmill with a freaking altitude mask simulated to 48,000 feet. I'm actually running all year round a little bit. But then like he's like, like in his uphill training book, he talked about like how his yearly progressions have gotten bigger. It's like Kilian's had like a 10-year plan since he was 15 years old. Most people need a coach for that. So he was, definitely a first mover, but I think we're going to see more of that in this sport as it becomes more professional and there's a chance, if someone to make a living at it for a longer period of time.
Switching topics, one of the things that I love that we agree about the most is that as the years progress, it's going to be borderline unacceptable to be anything but a pro athlete if you want to be relevant on podiums, etc. And by my count at UTMB, at least 4 of the 6 podium finishers across the men's and the women's fields were full-time. The one person I know that Blandine is an OBGYN doctor. I think Leah mentioned that. I don't know about Katarina. I know she has her PhD. I don't know if she's putting that to use outside of running. But 4 of the 6, so now a majority of the podium finishers, Jim, Zach, Courtney, Germain, are all full-time at this. And I know there's going to be people out there and they're going to say, oh, but like, what about this person? They have a full-time job and they got, whatever, this result's amazing. I'm like, yes. And you know what? When the Ford Model T came out, for a long time after, there were still horses and buggies on the road and there was cobblestone. Like eventually it changed. What are your thoughts there?
As the level of competitiveness of the sport increases and more money comes into the sport and you want to win races, you have to invest more time to do that. At a point, the amount of time that you need to invest needs to be all of it. That's kind of where it's at.
What's it going to take? Everything.
Yeah, like how much time do you need? All of the time. And if you're that person that can get away with elite level results while still doing something else, hats off to you for, doing it that way. But in my opinion, you could probably be better if you were full-time, full-time professional athlete. Like, I just don't understand why, again, like ultra running has to be the outlier, whereas every single other professional sport, they're full-time professionals, and anyone who's not isn't even close. Like the barrier to entry to, like, even if I was like 6'6" and athletically gifted, but I hadn't really started playing basketball competitively until like right now, my chance of making it into the league are pretty much slim to none. Because like I haven't gone up through the ranks and then gotten to the point where I've earned the place to be full time at it. Like, yeah, I just think there's a reason why all of these other sports, the professionals at it, that's all they do. Like, there's got to be a reason for it.
I just love reaching our episode quota on the full time conversation. For those that are tiring of it, it'll never end. I'm going to keep.
Well, I mean,
keep
we
it
can
going.
we can continue to we can add to it after what we did. We decided this during our watch parties is that if any brand wants to sponsor Finn or I to become a full time professional athlete for a year, just to see how much better we get, we would absolutely make a crap ton of content on that and push the hell out of that brand, and it would be worth your while.
100%. And to raise the stakes even more, and I'm going to use a Dan Kurtz quote here because A, it sounds cool, and B, I think there's more than a modicum of truth. Sprinters are born, distance runners are made. And that's going to be the quote on the front of the pitch deck to all these brands that we try to recruit for this project.
Yeah. Yep. I think I have room to grow as a distance runner if I had more time. And you as well, probably.
All right. I'm going to throw, just to maybe close up just some of the stats around the men's race. I'll list off some aid station fireball stuff here. Men's podium spread was 33 minutes, fourth tightest ever after 2011, 2016, 2021. The top 10 was the second tightest ever. Only 16 was tighter. This year's men's 10th place finisher, Baptiste Chassang, was the fastest 10th place finisher ever. He ran 21:38, and over the last decade, a 21:38 would have gotten you on the podium in 4 different races, 15, 16, 18, and 19, and a top 5 in any race prior to 22. There were 3 American men in the top 10 at UTMB. It was the greatest American podium ever, slightly surpassing Katie and Caitlin taking 1-3 last year. Not quite the greatest North American podium because you throw Marianne in there as the Canadian. That's a 1-2-3 punch. But greatest American, I would say. Miscellaneous stats. Tyler. I just had here that Tyler Green ran the fastest Western UTMB double of all time. Huge kudos to him. And then similar to the women's race from a visualization standpoint, with the exception of Tom Evans dropping off in the first half, the relative stability of Jim, Zach, Germont, and Matthew hovering in that 5 to 6 range all day before settling into 1 through 4 was amazing. And it just, to back up those Liam Aid Station Fireball stats, it goes to show that if you want to be in the mix in these podiums, you got to be up there fighting in contention, similar to the women's race.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you kind of do have to take a big risk if you want to win this race. And we saw that yet again. The one thing, like, I just have to say is, like, on the men's side, I was just wrong. Like, I was just straight up wrong. I mean, I was close in that apparently in Fantasy Free Trail, I was one of 12 people who picked Germont to win the race.
That was a great pick.
And he still got third. Like, he got third, and he was like very much in it to win it. And so I'm going to give myself a slight pat on the back for that. But to have thought that Jim and Zach would blow each other up, that was dumb. In hindsight, that was dumb. At the time, it seemed like an appropriate pick. But then even during our watch parties, I was like, okay, what are the chances they blow each other up? Like, probably still somewhat high. What are the chances one of them blows up? Almost certain. What are the chances none of them blow up and in some order they go 1-2? And I still figured, I was like, that's close to 0. Like, there's no way neither of them blow up and they just end up going 1-2. And like my mind is still pretty blown that happened. That's probably, like, I guess in terms of like all of UTMB, like, I thought Courtney would win if Courtney had broken her course record, that might have been a bigger surprise to me, but she didn't, and I didn't think she would because Hard Rock in Western States. We saw how she looked at Hard Rock, and it was a gritty win, as was this win. This was a very gritty UTMB win. So I think my biggest surprise of the weekend was just the fact that between Zach and Jim, neither of them blew up.
Do you think Walmsley still goes on to win if Germain doesn't pass him there before Champex-Lac and sort of reignite the fire in him?
I don't know.
Was that key to his rally?
I think I go with no, because I listened to Jim's free trail in a post-race interview.
Yeah.
And he said, one, he's like, I've become friends with Germain. It was really nice to like see a familiar face out there as I was falling back. But he said when he was falling back and Germain was catching up, he was in a pretty dark place and he didn't feel very good. And Germain catches up to him, and it took a while for Germain to catch up to him. And he looks back at him and he's like, damn, Germain looks great. Like he very much has a chance to win this race. And then Jim goes, so Germain passes me and I'm going to try my best to just hang on. As I'm hanging on, I realize, wait a minute. I am hanging on with the guy that I just said looks great and could win this race. And yet I'm hanging with him right now. And I think I feel like crap and look like crap. Why don't I still have a chance to win this race? And I thought that mindset shift, that was what ultimately led to Jim winning the race. He was like, wait a minute, if I just said this guy that is right next to me can win this race because he looks good, that means I have just as much chance to win this race. And that got him out of his funk. I don't know if that happens if Germain's not there. I think if Zach and Jim are an hour up on third place and Jim gets to bleed an hour to third, I don't know how he gets out of that negative feedback loop that he was in without Germain. What do you think?
Absolutely huge, and it plays out in the data. I think we both agree, and everyone that we've talked to agrees, that even with the course changes that took place for this year, they were insignificant in the context of course records. So from that moment, really going back all the way to Courmayeur, in this year's race, Jim had the fastest ever split from Courmayeur to the finish, Champex-Lac to the finish, and Trient to the finish. He took 18, 14, and 1 minutes, respectively, off those previous times. They were held by Mathieu Blanchard, Killian, and Xavier Thévenard. So I think it was all part of this momentum that he was building. And I think probably Jess, his wife and crew chief, had a lot to play in there too. I think he gave her some kudos in his Strava report. But I think that moment with Germain was absolutely pivotal. And
yeah, I agree.
I like what you said there about, hey, if the self-talk, if Germain looks great, then in actuality, I'm looking great too.
Yeah, because he's like, I'm not getting dropped by him.
I'm moving great at least.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not getting dropped by him, and I think he can win. If that's the case, why can't I win? And it's, again, the mental aspect of this sport is so fascinating, how it's not just all physical. Like, I still don't even think I would like die on the hill if Jim was the fittest guy that day. Like, Jim's always been really good at winning races, but like there's a very good chance that other people were just as fit as Jim, but Jim was Jim's good at keeping his mind engaged, and like Jim is good at going into the quote unquote Courtney Dauwalter pain cave. Did you see, I don't know if it was Free Trail or Billy Yang, I think it was Billy, put up on his story. Billy was following Jim running up to the top of La Flagère. Did you see that?
I did.
Where he let out a Timothy Olsen sized like roar cry.
Yeah.
I don't know if
that's what it takes.
I know. I don't know if I've ever been that deep in the hurt locker in a race before.
Oh, dude, I even do it on like 12-minute per mile shakeout runs. I'll be turning the corner and my neighbor would be like, come on, Ben, you got to dig deep.
I mean, I like whisper it under my breath.
Fail, someone will see me and I'm like, oh gosh.
Yeah. Like I'll talk to myself under my breath, but like, I'm never yelling at myself. And like, because I don't know if I don't think Jim is like consciously doing that either. I bet like that's how much he's trying. And I like it almost motivates me to try to get to a point like that in a race. Like as I don't think I've ever been close.
Jim is, now that I think about it, in that La Flégère video reminds me, Jim has a lot of these iconic get it together moments caught on video. The other one that comes to mind for me is from the Found on 49 video from 2016 when he's soaking wet, coming out of the river, doing the Green Gate climb, and he looks up at what he has left from the climb and then looks sort of like down at his two handhelds, and he kind of does like a George Foreman, Mike Tyson type like glove tap bottle punch with the bottles, and just like gets on going, like just does like a whoop,
Yeah.
and then like gets on going. He's so good at like self-talking himself up. It's so cool.
One of my favorite ones, I know we're going on a slight Jim tangent, but when they did the Hoka Carbon X 200K world record attempt, like when he was on his last lap and Eric Sensman is in the golf cart in front of him, like screaming at Jim, and like Jim knows that the world record is probably outside of his grasp, but at the same time he's not going to fold. And I think he just like he screams so loud at like Sensman of just like I am so after this is so effed, and just like and then just like growls again and just starts trying to sprint, even though he has like no, like the chance of the world record is gone because he would need to throw down like a 4:30 last mile. But he's just like, Eric, I hear you, it's gone, I'm gonna continue to hammer though, and I'm gonna let out this battle cry anyways to just prove to you that I'm still going all out. And I was just like, damn, dude. As he has like a gunshot wound in his shoulder.
That would be a really cool montage video to put together, all of the times caught on camera of Jim trying to stoke his own fire, pump himself up, and using that as one of the last things you watch for anything pre-race, pre-workout, pre-run. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah. All right. I'll talk to Jim's people and we'll see if we can get something like that pulled out of the Walmsley archives.
You mentioned Courtney earlier. We would be remiss not to acknowledge that she completed the Western States Hard Rock UTMB Triple, won each of the races. There's not much that we haven't said about this. We spent a lot of the last episode talking about this. The first thing I want to talk about is from one of her post-race interviews. She did not whatsoever shut the door on the rest of her season. It does not appear like her season is totally over. She's not willing to rule anything out. There's still 4 months left. That's amazing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
I mean, to do the track thing, right? You want her to do the track 100-miler in like December.
I figured Courtney's got enough time to tune up for Desert Solstice in December. I don't really know why, because at the same time, I actually don't want to see that, because I want to see like a year of preparation of flat ultras for Courtney. I don't want to see her again go from a whole bunch of mountain stuff and then just jump into a flat ultra, because that wouldn't show her true potential at that event. But it would be a fun place to start. I hope, honestly, like again, putting my coaching hat on here, I hope Courtney just shuts it down for the most part for the rest of the year. Like she's registered for the Javelina 100K because she's going to run it with her mom. That's what Courtney should do this year. Like, and that's it. I don't want to see anything happen to Courtney from like a adrenal fatigue, overtraining type standpoint. I also hope that, I'm sure her and Kevin both see as well, as like, had she smashed Western States. She won Hard Rock. She won UTMB. I don't think she smashed Hard Rock, and I don't think she smashed UTMB. If she smashes all three races, sure, go for a fourth one. But like, Courtney was very much in survival mode at the end of Hard Rock and at the end of UTMB. And while she's good enough where she can do that and still win these races, that right there is a sign that like the body's getting pretty tired, you know? And like, I think this was a good enough challenge.
If I could whisper into Courtney's ear or pitch her on a 2024 and beyond schedule, well, first of all, I agree with you. I do hope she shuts it down purely in the interest of overemphasizing recovery and prolonging her competitive career as long as possible. I know that she has no interest in ever fully walking away from the sport. I think she's going to, as long as she can move her legs, she's going to be there till she's 80 or 90, whatever longer. But what I would like to see her do now that she's done pretty much everything in this sport, I want her to go on an American race revival tour. And what I mean by that is just by virtue of her presence, her popularity, her stature in the sport, her reach, identifying all of these races that from an elite competitive standpoint used to matter in like 2010, going and doing those races. Some film crews come, some media outlets like us come, we cover it, and people get stoked about it again. So races like Wasatch, the Bear, Bighorn, I'll even, and this might be controversial, I'll say Leadville. I think Leadville by and large
That's actually
is no
the only
longer,
race I still want her to go all out in.
Yeah, Leadville. Course
Leadville
record,
is pretty much the only one.
In a sad state, like Leadville has become the like fitness influencers 100-miler.
Dude, it's become the Badwater of trail. There's my hot take right there.
Yeah.
Leadville's become the Badwater of trail.
Badwater of trail. So stuff like that. And then the other part of me really wants to see her do a desert solstice. I do not think that this is even a lukewarm take. I think it's just a fact. I think that if she properly trained for a track 100-miler, a track 24-hour event, she would destroy all of the associated course records. So I would love to see her focus on that at some point, but that's just the fan in me.
I actually don't know for like 12-hour and 100-miler. I think Courtney would have to try really hard to come close to the American and world records for that. I think as it gets longer, Courtney's chances go up because that's clearly where her strengths are. But evidence being 15:30 at Western States, well, shoot, you got to be pretty fast to run that. Also, last time Courtney did flat ultras, super shoes weren't a thing. Let's get Courtney in some super shoes.
Okay, I know that we're just like spitball. One more thing, the Cocodona 250. I really want we know she's stoked on it. We've heard it from her lips. She's stoked on Cocodona. I really want to see her on Cocodona as well.
Yeah, I want to see a Courtney Dauwalter versus Michael McKnight Cocodona throwdown. Oh, and yeah, just string bean. Get healthy. Get in there as well.
All right, I've got like 4 more topics I want to make sure we go through. Most of them are sort of brand team related and also golden ticket related for CCC. The last thing that I want to ask you about for UTMB is when you look back at what you watched at UTMB this year, what was one of the biggest lessons or takeaways from this race? It could be in any area: racing strategy, nutrition, media, memorable moments, anything.
One of my biggest takeaways from the race was how much faster the aid station transitions got. Like, it seemed significantly different than last year. Because like even Killian was still taking his pretty good time at the aid station. Like we're talking like 3 to 4 minutes, maybe even more at some of the major aid stations of like sitting down, eating food. That's what the majority of people did at UTMB up until this year. Now the majority of the top people like stayed standing, didn't eat much at the aid stations, grabbed everything they needed and left. Very much like what we see in American ultras in terms of like kind of, I guess, prior to this year, I had always thought that you needed to take your time at the aid stations, do a little reset, and then leave because this race was so long, this race was so difficult. What I saw just watching the live stream this year on both the men's and women's sides was like, you don't actually need to do that as long as you're still in a good competitive mindset. Gone are the days of casual, what we had always dubbed like the Euro style aid station transition of like eat 1,000 calories at the aid station and then leave. We're getting to that point where again it might just comes down to like, if you want to win this race, you need to take those risks in the aid stations of like grab everything that you need to get to the next aid station or next crew checkpoint, but you better be able to eat all your calories out on course because there is no time for you to be, you'd better be multitasking. like you better be running and eating. You cannot be sitting and eating. And that just seemed super fascinating to me this year.
Is that something you're already starting to, or have you been coaching your athletes on? Like when you think about race day preparation, one of the biggest things you guys go through is exactly how you're going to visualize and execute these aid stations.
Yeah. And for the majority of the athletes that I coach, they're not at the very front of the pack. It's not a get in and get out as fast as possible. But, I think stripping things, like they haven't needed to add that level of difficulty to their aid station transitions. But I think for most of them, it's like, don't forget things, like make sure you go through the major hierarchy of needs checklist before you leave the aid station. It's good to rehearse what that checklist is before you come into the aid station. Those sorts of things. I mean, the top of the fields, like the pros, they're already doing that. And now it's how quickly can I get through that checklist? And like, I think the other thing is like before it was always like go through the checklist, double check, leave. There's not time to double check anymore. You better hit it right on the first try and then leave.
All right. The biggest takeaway for me was that, and this might sound counterintuitive or blasphemous to a lot of people who associate watching ultra running with watching paint dry. I actually think after watching this UTMB live stream that the baseline product is absolutely amazing. And from a fundamental standpoint, there are already a lot of things that the race is doing right. We've talked about how their social media is amazing. Commentators are amazing. When the stream is live and they're in aid stations and they're moving around all the tables and they're out on the course catching like Jim passing Germain, Jim passing Zach, it's amazing. I think the baseline product is amazing. And at this point, it's just a matter of amassing enough resources to get more of all of those moments captured into the entire 24 hours and getting that to the viewer. There is this book I just finished reading. It's by this guy named Rory Sutherland. It's called Alchemy, and it's sort of this marketing handbook. And one of the examples that reminds me of ultra running is this study that like McKinsey or one of these consulting firms did on getting more people to ride the trains in the country. And initially they thought the problem was we need to make the train ride shorter because people care the most about expediency and getting from point A to point B faster. Turns out when they finished all of these studies, the most important thing was not getting them to the finish line faster. It was making sure that they were sufficiently entertained throughout the process. Mm-hmm. And so I think that everything that we have at our disposal for this live stream, we have enough to entertain people beyond just like hardcore fans like ourselves. I just don't think we've quite gotten there in terms of getting all the shots, doing more frequent updates with athletes, getting the coverage bookended through the middle of the night, putting all these graphics on screen that kind of contextualize everything that's happening in the moment. I think the only problem that we have left with these live streams, at least in places where 5G has been solved, is just collecting all the most interesting moments and contextualizing them really fast. But I'm very optimistic. And I think ultra running is going to become even more interesting to more people once we solve that.
Yeah, kind of like you said, like you can make anything exciting with the right storyline. I mean, Christ, like we have the Cornhole World Championships on ESPN every year. It's like grown men with beer bellies throwing bean bags into a hole, and the commentating and then the way that they just like have camera angles and like break down the sport, you end up, I'm like, this is stupid. And then 45 minutes later, I'm like, yes, yeah, I really wanted that dude to win, who I'd never known either, because they're like already made me a fan of it. Like that's a perfect example of how like you can make anything exciting. And I think we're actually in a sport that like from a physical standpoint is much more exciting than cornhole.
Oh yeah. Or darts.
Yeah. Like
or
they make darts.
World Series of Poker.
Exactly. Yeah. We watch people play cards.
Yeah.
For gazillions of dollars. This is at least like physical.
There was that guy, we mentioned him earlier in the conversation, Simon from Discord. He had a really cool like bullet point list of like features that he would like to see added, like in like an infographic type format, overlaid on the commentating, overlaid on the screen, that will keep people more engaged and involved in the live stream. I think that's a great idea. And then weirdly enough, and I guess maybe it's both issue with the darkness at night and capacity. I mean, the UTMB live stream went dark for like, what was it, 5 hours, 6 hours, where we were just watching them cut cheese for 6 hours. And
in
waiting on aid station.
2022, Dylan Bowman did remote commentary from his basement through that night section when all the commentators in Europe were asleep. I really thought they were going to
Dylan, right?
Well, I was just in the chat helping him, like just being like, Dylan, update your tracker. Cause like he only had like, you only have so much capacity as one person. Like I wish that he had a second person to talk with. So again, if like UTMB wants us to do the remote night section of UTMB, like sure, why not? It would have just been what we did, except more formal. I really thought that they were going to build upon that this year. And instead it went backwards. So that was one thing that I was just like a little bit bummed about, was like, yeah, you're right. Like there was still a big media hole in the night section for UTMB. But at the same time, I just don't think it being late in the middle of the night, that's not a good enough excuse, because if you don't want, and like that was one of the more important parts of the course of between Courmayeur and like Champex-Lac, like that part's important. That's a pivotal part in both the men's and women's races, and there's no one there to commentate on it. If you don't want that to happen, don't start the race at 6 p.m.
And by the way, for anybody that's watching or listening, and I think I speak for us both here, Brett and I are both baseline stoked on like the current product and how it's evolved over the years. We're just, for the sake of fun and hopefully instigating for the future, it's fun to like just brainstorm what could be added to it to bring even more people into the fan experience.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if should we move on to golden ticket talks?
I'm going to throw two things. So two things I'll bring in. The first is who will take the golden tickets to Western States next year, because CCC was the first of 7 golden ticket races for 2024 Western. And then there's also speculation that one of the golden ticket races, it'll be a golden ticket race this year, but there's speculation that it's no longer going to be the Americas Major next year. The Canyons, 100K, 100 mile, that whole series of events, there's speculation that it may change. It may stay the same, but it may change. And so I think we should talk about those two topics before we close up.
Okay.
Where do you want to start?
So I heard, I guess, maybe men's golden tickets. I heard that John Albon and Dakota Jones have tentatively taken their golden tickets to race Western States, but they don't, have to really fully commit for a bit. Josh Sheng, who got second, he is already in Western States because he got 4th. So he already had an auto in. So tentatively as it stands, Jonathan Albon and Dakota Jones will be taking the golden tickets. If one of them declines later on down the road, it would go to Johnny Ray, and then we'd have like the Javelina duo again of Dakota and Jonathan Ray. If say John Albon and Dakota both decline their tickets later on, it would go to Johnny Ray and Drew Holman, which would be fascinating. I mean, it'd be cool to get both of them back into Western States. But as Anthony Costales said, kind of funny that the like biggest international race in the world, the golden tickets again just end up going to 2 Americans when they're trying to like globalize their fields. Anthony's like, look at that. It just ends up going to 2 more Americans, except this time they had to fly all the way to Chamonix to qualify for Western States. So that's
such a funny point.
Yeah. I would love of those 4 eligible individuals, I would love to see any of them run Western States again. Like, I don't think there's anyone I'd want to see more. Like, I guess the only one who hasn't run Western States yet is Jonathan Albon. So that would be like the one who I would like to see run Western States the most. But like, I would love to see Dakota go back and take another crack at it. Would love to see Johnny Ray take another crack at it. Would love to see Drew go back to Western States again.
If I was a betting person, I'm saying that there's only one men's golden ticket coming out of CCC, and it's going to roll down to John Ray. I believe that John Albon, Dakota, and Drew are all going to decline it.
Do you think that's because they all focus on UTMB next year?
Or something of that sort. I think in my mind, and this is just based on what I can observe on social and stuff, it seems to me the only person in that top 5 that's not already going back is John Ray, that is truly interested in returning. So I wouldn't be surprised if only one person takes it. On the men's side, on the women's side, it looks like Ingvild did take it. Helen Mino Faulkner's not going to take it. So then Emily Hoggett already has it. So it rolls down to Hao Ha Tai and Emily Schmitz. And I could also, I don't know much about Hao, but I don't know. Emily Schmitz is, from what I understand, not historically like a 100-mile runner. I should be fact checked there, but I could also see a scenario where it's like one ticket's taken there. And this is not unprecedented. Like, I think there was one UTMB year where the entire men's top 5 didn't take the ticket. And then at Les Templiers, I think the entire women's top 5 didn't take it. So that is one of the gamble of internationalizing these golden ticket races. It doesn't have the same level of interest sometimes outside the US. So it's just one of the gamble.
And I'm still in the boat. And like I've said this since last year, is like, I just don't think the UTMB World Series finale needs to be a golden ticket race. I just don't think it needs to be. What should replace it? I don't know. I could give you a bunch of races, but I just still don't think, again, even moving it down to CCC, the golden ticket chase seemed non-existent. It was a chase to win CCC. And then like the golden ticket to me still somewhat seems like an afterthought, because like there was no talk of it on the live stream for CCC's coverage of like, oh, so-and-so just moved up into like 5th place. They're eligible for a golden ticket if it gets past town. Or, Emily Hoggett's moved up into 2nd. Helen Mino Faulkner's in 3rd. That means she's now eligible to run Western States. Like, I didn't hear much of any of that. So it's like, I think the golden tickets deserve, like CCC deserves to be its own championship, and golden ticket races deserve to be their own, have their own spotlight too.
It's like,
that's my stance.
I think I mostly agree with that. This is probably a crude example, but it comes to mind. I think that most of these golden tickets should go to races that don't have much else going for it in terms of promotion. Like, they aren't already an end in and of themselves, like you said about CCC. And I think, look at Bandera, for example. When you take the golden ticket away from Bandera, you pull out the competitive rug. It's the ultra running equivalent of deindustrialization. Like, Bandera becomes the ultra running equivalent of like Youngstown, Ohio, and Detroit, Michigan. Like, they become nothing from a competitive standpoint. So give these races the competitive lifeline that they need.
Okay.
Give it to them. CCC is never going to be hungering for competition.
So this is like maybe slight devil's advocate, like adjacent devil's advocate. Dude, let's just give the golden tickets from Canyons and CCC to Black Canyon and just go like 6 deep or 7 deep and make it like top 12 become eligible, and just have like this monster, like almost one race to qualify for Western States, and then go race Western States. Like, can you imagine how nuts Black Canyon would be if they set aside 200 elite spots or whatever and had 7 golden tickets on the line on each side?
It's brilliant. And Black Canyon
is it though? Maybe not.
I think it is.
It would be fun.
The reason it's attractive to me is because it's yet another move to concentrate talent on the same start lines in a sport where it's inherently difficult to do that more than once or twice a year. And then you layer that on top of the fact that Aravaipa is already cream of the crop in terms of promoting their events. It would just be like, putting more fuel on a bonfire. It'd be great.
I think it'd be pretty fun. Let's just see a super concentrated golden ticket race.
Do you think the Americas Major is moving for UTMB? Do you think it's going to stay Canyons or it's going to move?
So the only reason I think it's going to stay Canyons is because I just don't know where else it goes to. Like, that's my own, like, it's not a good counter argument, but like, that's all I've got.
Just for the sake of having fun, like drunken conversation, I threw a couple crazy ones out there. The first one, could it be moved to a pre-existing UTMB race that would just need to add a distance? So, for example, Speed Goat. That would be so exciting to me to have an America's Major, here in Utah. I would go bonkers over that. Is there another race purchase in UTMB's future? And this is unthinkable, but like, could Lake Sonoma be bought up? because they have a 100K distance. I think there's like the fall
They're
version
not
of
on the
it. I don't
same
know.
weekend. They're technically
Not on the same
two
weekend.
different races. The 50
They
mile and the
they are.
100K.
Okay. Gotcha. This would never happen, at least not that I can imagine. But could Black Canyon become that race?
Mm-hmm.
And then the most boring one to me would be Desert Rats. Does Desert Rats just expand? Because
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
So,
See, like
I think
that's
it's going to stay.
yeah, that's why I think Canyons is going to stay, because like on the calendar, it still makes the most sense. Like if you do Speed Goat, it's a world major. So like Speed Goat 2024 would be a major to qualify you for the UTMB races 2025, right?
But like Valderan, I think is somewhere around that same weekend as Speed Goat, and the people that podium at that race get auto entry into the next month's UTMB.
Okay, so
they auto qualify them, right?
It's not too soon.
I don't think
like,
so. I think because it's 100K and below, you can do that.
Yeah.
Call it a double.
But like, can you qualify for UTMB at Valderan, or just CCC because it's just 100K?
Well, I think you can, if you podium at the 100K, you can then formally request the UTMB organization to move you up to the 100 mile.
Yeah, because like the whole idea with the Canyons World Series was top 10 from their 100 mile, 100K, and 50K all get respective entry into it. So it at least, and
Good
then
point. Okay,
and
so
then they could move around. So it's like
missing 100
you
miles
need 100, and then like you're not running a Speed Goat 100 mile and then knocking out a good UTMB like 6 weeks later. So like,
okay, but let the record show Speed Goat, if there was a way to coordinate with Forest Service, would have one of the most amazing potential 100-mile courses. We talked about this on episode 3 of Single Track if you want to go way back in the archives.
Yeah. Again, we run into the problem with these America majors of there being too many races, because like the other one is like, oh, Broken Arrow weekend. If you did a 50K and then had a 100K and then just made a 100 mile at Broken Arrow, or like say the 100 mile actually was Western States, and then the 100K and the 50K became Broken Arrow, and you did like a 2-weekend UTMB sort of festival thing, like kind of works. But then it's like someone like the 100K almost seems like a good cherry pick at Broken Arrow because so many people are running Western States and like they're kind of forced to. And then it's like Canyons actually works because you've got the golden ticket race. It's like far enough away from Western States, plenty far enough away from UTMB. Black Canyon also works, but then it's like if you sprinkle in a different race that's not Black Canyon or Canyons, now it just feels like there's too many races. Like we're going to have to do a big sit down and look at our calendars and see. So I think right now it's just going to stay Canyons, or you would have to go some strange location to like maybe it is UTM, like Skylar said, Puerto Vallarta in Mexico, and like just be one of the first qualifiers for the following year.
If you're watching or listening to this, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the status of the Americas Major? Where is it going? Is it staying put? Where could it go? Entertain us with your best theories. Brett, last topic for us, I promise. Team analysis. So which teams performed best? Which teams impressed? Which ones appeared to falter? Who had the best kits? I'll give you mine first. I thought we're going to disagree on this. I thought Salomon, their blood splattered shirts were very cool. They resonated with me. Another stat, 37 of the 40 top 20 male and female finishes at UTMB were sponsored. Only 3 were, my favorite phrase, unattached. For UTMB specifically, Hoka put 5 in the collective top 10s. Salomon put 4. Those were the 2 most frequent brands. But if we extend across all 3 World Series finals, I think North Face was the most dominant. So I'll say that's what I had to say there.
Yeah, I haven't added up. That's what I want to do next is I want to add up all the brands across OCC, CCC, and UTMB, and I'll just put like tallies. I'll send you a picture of it. Just like based off of memory, I saw the most North Face out there, and I also thought they had one of the most boring kits, which that's a bummer. I think On had some sick kits with their like their teal seafoam, but then also their stark white new On packs. I think that was a good move for On.
Yeah.
Not a fan of Solomon's kits. I thought they looked like roadkill because the pack, if you took the pack off, the whole shirt then makes more sense. But when you put a pack on and cover up 80% of the shirt, it just looks like blood splatter on the sleeves. And I'm just like, not for that. Again, I think still one of my favorite kits is Hoka's the blue to orange sunset gradient kit. I think that's a sick look. Yeah, and like I think Adidas Terrex probably made the biggest splash in footwear news with their Agravic Speed Ultra announcement. They also seem to have a pretty successful day. They had a lot of hot and cold, but they had enough people there where it still created a pretty good amount of success. Nike Trail did significantly better than last year. They had a pretty good day out there too. They had a good like marketing contingent over there out in Chamonix. Saw a lot of cool stuff from them. Nike's been putting a lot more into trail, and I'm excited to see how that rolls into the rest of 2023 and beyond. But yeah, I'll send you over my tally marks for all the stuff. And the other thing I wanted to look up too is there is significantly more Pebax foams in the top 10s of these races than ever before. I got to do a little bit more math on that, but we're seeing some super foams in the trails.
Awesome. Well, Bret, this has been such a joy to record. This also concludes our UTMB coverage. Can't thank you enough for hopping on the mic with me. And we probably did like 14 hours of coverage, which is amazing. If you're still listening right now and you haven't already, go check out Bret's channel, Conversational Pace, which at the moment is reviewing trail shoes. Maybe at some point we'll also include other gear in the trail space. Also his coaching business, Trails and Tarmac. We'll link to it all in the show notes. For listeners on our last topic there, would love to hear from you on what you think historically are the coolest kits of all time across brands, in addition to what stole the show at UTMB. Make sure to leave us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. I think I checked all the boxes there. Bret, you got any final thoughts?
No, this has been great. Yeah, I need to go like turn the humidifier on and like rest my vocal cords.